Hello and welcome back to the Sell Like You podcast with me, Harriet Meller. And today we have Jake in for today's episode as part of our Tech Sales Top Performer series. Now, Jake is a passionate advocate for careers in sales and a field he discovered later in life. And I think for a lot of us listening, a lot of us that are part of this industry, it certainly wasn't the natural career journey that many people witness, especially, your lawyers and your doctors. They know what they wanted to do and off they went. And so, now Jake is on a mission to help others find their way into sales sooner and matching them within, ideal clients, those tech, SaaS, hypergrowth organizations. And so I'm super excited to talk to you, Jake, today about lots of questions we've got from what we see in the industry, from, clients, and then obviously people wanting to get into the industry. But how do they become these top performers? So, Jake, welcome. Let's kick us off by telling us a bit about why tech sales for you.
Great. Well, look, thank you for having me on, Harriet. So tech sales for me was, like you sort of alluded to, one that I fell into. Basically, I'd had a different career. I'd ended up going down an electrical wholesaling career, so in construction, which was through my family business. Really enjoyed that. We got bought out, and then that became less enjoyable as we went through a merger and acquisition. And I saw a lot of my friends working in this industry of tech, and they looked like they were having fun. So I thought, okay, well, I'll try that. And just I couldn't get in. The skills that I had weren't appreciated in the same way, and so I eventually found my way to sales, and fortunately found a prop tech company that where my construction knowledge was really useful, and loved it from there. Really, the big change for me was a sales coach came and sort of explained how I could approach it scientifically, and what I was doing I could repeat, and then I just saw my results continue from there. Actually learned about
Incredible.
a growth mindset, all of these sorts of things. So yeah, loved it, passionate advocate for it. It was a great career.
Amazing.
I think it's something everyone.
And interesting there, because you obviously said that, you work with a sales coach. And I think, the piece there that you said is that they made it, make sense to you. And so, everybody's so different in the way that we learn. Everybody's so different in the way of how they go about selling. And I think, it's very rare to find two people doing it the exact same way. And so interesting then, and also great insight on the part of the employer as well to get you involved, in that sales coach element, which is also awesome to hear. And so what obviously you've gone from tech sales and then now into recruitment. Usually it's the other way around, in my experience. So tell me about why you did it back to front.
That's funny, actually. I spoke to a guy that had done that from recruitment to tech sales, and that was one of the questions he asked me. So yeah, it's not common to do it this way. Basically, where I was working, I worked really closely with a colleague. We got on really well, and we both wanted to do our own thing. And he led the sales for the B2C side, and I led the sales for the B2B side. And the thing that we sort of, I suppose, almost bonded about and spent a lot of our time talking and trying to improve was getting people in and getting them to ramp up quickly and become top performers. And what we saw or learned from that was that there was no sort of exact person or exact science on that. As you just touched on, everybody is different. And that was really intriguing for us. And we thought, well, actually, this would be really good to do this for more people. And recruitment is the way to do that. So, yeah, we sort of fell into recruitment, no recruitment experience. And so we're learning as we go a little bit. But yeah, just trying to help people get into what we think are great careers.
Yeah, amazing. And so, obviously you're now looking at it from the other side of then saying, well, how do we find these great people and then how do we place them? And I think, I think I'm allowed to say that, recruiters do get a bad rap for, just placing people, just putting that job advert out, doing the usual kind of checker boxing and moving on. And I think, the thing that I've seen just based on us being connected and obviously, understanding a bit more about what you do and obviously the passion element of getting great people into these great companies. What do you think has really helped you stand out from the crowd in that. And I think that's a good segue then into us talking about the right candidates. But how do you think that that's helped you stand out without having that recruitment background, but knowing who you want to help and how you want to help them?
Yeah, okay, that's a great question. The feedback that we often get from our clients is that they're really impressed with the quality of the candidates that we put forward. And I don't know that we're looking in massively different areas to other recruiters. So I think it's what we're looking for within those the candidates that we speak with. So we try and break it down to understand people or people's characteristics and traits much more so than their experience or their qualifications. And so having a deeper understanding of that and then being able to speak really candidly to a sales leader to say what's important for you, for your ideal customers, what are their personas, and trying to match that back to the personalities that we speak with. I think that's a little bit of where the magic is, and where just how we approach that as sales leaders and trying to understand that we can bring that into the recruitment process.
Yeah, awesome. So talk to me a little bit about that element of, you mentioned there about what we're looking for, and it might be a very similar pool of people and going out to, a very similar area, potentially, but you're looking for something different. What does that actually look like to everybody else? What should we be actually be looking for or building our criteria against?
So I think a great thing to do here is if you've got top performers in place already, speak with them and
Mm.
what's important, and try and understand from their perspective why they've been so successful. So for one sales role, disqualification might be much more important than I don't know, another sales opportunity that is maybe a shorter sales cycle and there's more volume involved. And there's
Mhm.
different characteristics that can build towards that. So understanding that is a great starting point. We break down, I think we're at around sort of 26 characteristics that we try and look for in almost a traffic light system initially. And then we've built a process to better evaluate that. And we can change that depending on maybe the experience required, or the role, and what they'll be doing on a day to day, because there's nuances within each role. So I think back to your question, that's where I would start. If you don't have a sales team and if you're doing it for the first time, like moving from founder-led sales, for instance, then speak to a recruiter. This is where the recruiter can really sit down with you and try and pull that knowledge out and get that down on paper so it's something actionable, and then move away from there, putting together that sort of process.
Yeah, interesting. And so of that, you talked there about the 26 characteristics. Um, if you had to choose one or two of them, to really highlight what makes, because obviously the goal here is this for us to really unlock what is a top performer in sales, and if we look at where you land, is that we're looking at these BDRs, SDRs at this very early stage, and so what are we looking at for here? Because they're coming in, and this is, and I want to talk to you about price, because I'm going to say, like, this is the cheapest stage of their journey. But as they then go up, you've got to look for the trajectory of where they're going to go. So in that 26, what are one or two things that you are looking for that makes the difference?
Good question, Harriet. I'd say the two are the ones that probably everybody is already familiar with, but it's how you would assess them and try and understand them over a longer term, which is difficult. So I would go with coachability and
Mhm.
resilience.
Yes. Okay.
Um, and I'd put those two at the top, and I'd underline them with what I would broadly term as like EQ. And so what we try and do is understand a person's self-awareness, how they see themselves as being perceived and how they perceive others, and all of that sort of builds together into how they're going to approach being coachable for starters, and then also their resilience. And there's tells in everybody's journey, right? And I would say for myself, I'd say I'm quite resilient now, but I maybe wasn't, or not maybe, I definitely wasn't when I was younger, and I've actually learned that later in my career. So finding
Mm.
sales later in my career was perfect for me, because I think it would have chewed me up. And
Ah. Yeah, how interesting. That later on then you found that this would have been a more suitable role, whereas if you'd done it 10 years ago, you would never have survived. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think so. I think it would have been really dependent on having a great manager. Um, Whereas actually, when I was older, I had that self awareness. I was really reflective, so I could listen back to my calls and almost coach myself a little bit. And then a coach came in and changed that, and I was able to sort of really fly. Um, and yeah, if particularly at the SDR level, that's why sometimes uh, a different background to just the more sort of straight out of uni. This is their first role. We're going to put you as an SDR. Yeah, there's some amazing SDRs from that, but we've had great success with teachers, for instance, like deeply empathetic, able to manage lots of information coming at them. Yeah, and like we've had clients that are really, really like buzzing with with that sort of profile.
So teachers is an interesting one. Would never have put them in the box of tech sales. Now I tend to go towards the if you know, I get asked this a lot, like like number one, do you know any great salespeople? Yes, I know lots of them, but I'm not about to start taking them out of my clients and putting them over here. But then so I think I always then say go and look for. And so resilience for me is that I absolutely wholeheartedly agree with that, because I will then say go and look for high resilient role or high jobs that require a level of high resilience. So I would then say like used cars, new cars, recruitment, and advertising. They tend to be the four that they fall within. But really interesting that you've said teachers. Do they have the resilience?
Um, yeah, you've got to ask for it, and obviously that there's some that maybe don't. But I can think of three examples off the top of my head of teachers that had they'd moved up through their teaching career, and as they'd moved away from actually teaching and into maybe a more sort of political role, that resilience was really important to manage the different sort of pools on their time and the resources. Uh,
Yeah, and
and
children.
then they and the children, yeah, and then they had an understanding of actually what they wanted from their career, and how they were able to articulate that. That demonstrated much more than just saying they were resilient. So, but that was really interesting. And then when they went into interviews and began to talk about that, they've had great success. And yeah, actually, of those guys, they've all started as SDRs and are progressing within their careers inside sort of 12 months, which in this market is really impressive.
Really good. Yeah, how interesting. And so obviously, we're talking about the characteristics of that early on. And you're dealing in that in you're the middle person between, the business that's looking to grow and then the salespeople that want to get into this new exciting industry. And so you're going to have I'm assuming you've got a lot of pressure from those businesses, because I mean, I deal with a lot, maybe more so on the training side of it, and where they come in and then there's a lot of pressure, because as soon as somebody says they want to hire a salesperson, especially if it's one of the first, there's a lot of emphasis on this salesperson transforming their business. And yes, a salesperson can do that, and we certainly do see it, but it's an investment at the beginning. So you say yes, they've got the resilience, and yes, we've checked them against this scorecard, or this uh, traffic light, scoring mechanism. What do you have to convince? I don't know if that's the right word. What do you have to do with the business to then say, I know that this isn't the usual typical salesperson you might have drawn, but this is somebody who we believe is gonna succeed. What does that conversation look
Um, that is again a really good question, Harriet.
like?
So we've worked with a client recently, and the co-founder was from a sales background. So that conversation was more around basically trying to link those characteristics to their experience and success within sales, so that they could understand it. And they
Right.
were that was, I suppose, an easier conversation than where we have dealt with founders that maybe don't come from that sales background. If it's a sales
Mm.
leader, being able to talk in their language and explain this is why we think that, we've obviously got to develop that rapport and trust for them to buy into us. But that's how we approach it with the
Yeah.
founders that maybe don't have that sales experience, that's a bit more challenging. But I think the important thing there is that it's not maybe that salesperson that's going to transform the organization at that level. It's the sales leader. And so having the sales leader is the crucial thing there. So I suppose in answer to that point, the decision is at a higher level in terms of the expectation on the salesperson.
Yeah, interesting. And I guess, I mean, obviously I understand that, the recruitment element, you're selling your services into that business, but I've not thought of the element of selling the candidate in, because the couple of things you've just described there, I'm like, they are sales techniques. You've shared a story, and you've given an insight in terms of connecting language, and that's all part of us as salespeople, is identifying that. But then I've not really thought about the fact that of selling the candidate into the position. It's more so, let's sell my services in, and then once we're in, it's I'm going to, you can pick of these three. But I guess that's what separates, the type of service that you offer with what else is out there in the market, which is really interesting.
Yeah, that's something that we had to learn. Like and I think our naivety was good there, because we just approached every conversation as we want to try and talk in a way that is going to resonate with who we're talking to. So whether that was about candidates, ourselves, or our services, we were learning all of that. So yeah, we try and be really specific and work at that entry level role, SDR, BDR positions. We do get those high level roles, but this is where we think we're really good at doing that and understanding it and helping organizations to make the right decision.
And so when you've got I'm coming back to this checklist, and then obviously then positioning them in, people start out, and it's really interesting. And I've seen lots of, I've been part of lots of growing sales teams, which has been great exposure, and more so for me when I was leading a team. But when I look at everybody coming in, you do all that due diligence, and this sounds very in depth. And if you then once you got them onto that on ramp of they've started, if you had 3 salespeople going into the same business, and you go, okay, we've ticked the box, and from an interview perspective, they're all going to have slightly different greens over ambers over reds, but they obviously meet a certain criteria to get through. Once they're in, what's the key differentiator between somebody that's just going to be okay and somebody that's going to be amazing? And at what point do you think that can be seen? And I'll just caveat that with the fact that I think, like, I want to see it from the manager's perspective of, like, what are they looking for? Because they've come in and then they're like, oh, but this guy's not doing as well as this guy, or this girl's not, is way better than this guy, and I don't know why. So yeah, I think some insight around that would be really interesting.
Yeah, okay. I think that one's much more straightforward, and it's
Okay.
definitely how coachable that person is. And
Mm.
coachable to me is it's probably a vague term, and I actually probably say that, and I'd have to think to give you a more concise answer on what I mean.
Yeah.
But it's definitely around that of the people that we have placed that have gone on to do really well. They invest in themselves, so
Mm.
they either search out top performers, or they look for additional coaching, or they pressure their managers for more training. They reflect really effectively on what they've done, and that's all underpinned by wanting to hear how to improve. And if we then check in with those candidates 1 month, 2 months, 3 months down the line, or a lot of them we've got longer relationships with, you can hear that they're becoming more and more proficient at asking for that feedback and action in it. And there's some people that I think that we've spoken to that are just going to be amazing salespeople, because they're always looking to improve. And that,
Mm.
even just talking on that, that's where I go back to sort of the passion of it, because I think that's so useful just as a skill for life. There's sort of real fulfillment in that. It's great in sales because you can very tangibly do well and earn more money and earn promotions through that. But that also is so transferable to other aspects of your life. And yeah, that's something that I was fortunate to benefit from. So it's amazing when we see that with other people.
Yeah, and it's so interesting to hear that obviously, as you mentioned, I'm glad that you clarified a bit more around the coachability element, because it's not just saying, can you be trained, but it's, are you willing to be, will you go above and beyond to be trained? and it's something that I share a lot with the businesses and then the salespeople that I get to work with. Is, I share a lot about my journey, and I think, I could say I was one of them, and I was there, ready to be coached. But the difference was we didn't have sales coaches. Like, it wasn't really a thing. We had a guy, I think he was called Dermot Collins, and he was really interesting, but he used to speak really quietly, so that everybody would lean in. It was real old school tactics, and I think, I still see him today, and I know I would love to have a chat with him. Maybe I might add that as a bit of a goal for the podcast to get him on. But that was my only exposure, and when I say only, as in we had him in like one day, like I think maybe twice in the 6 years that I worked at that company. And so, whereas today there's so much around that, coaching and mentorship and development, which was very few and far between, especially in my time. But when I look then at that coachability and that wanting to go above and beyond, that's where I see the true difference at that next level as well. And I think that that's probably the component, and I would say resiliency as well, because you still need that, because you're still going to get the no's. But I think the coachability and maybe I would probably call that a drive or a thirst for knowledge, is that you need to go out there and find that yourself, because we can do as much as we can for you from a development, or, point you in the right position. But you've got to read the books, you've got to watch the YouTube videos, you've got to spend the time familiarizing yourself so that it makes sense to you. And this was, I guess, really like my journey in education, like from a school element, was I hated school. And it wasn't really for me, because they taught in one way and one way only, and that didn't align to me. And so when I came into the workforce, I had to learn in so many different ways that it meant that I then, once I realized I could learn, I was like, hang on a minute, I can learn. And I'm not as stupid as I thought back at school. And I'm going to just keep, bringing in that knowledge, but looking at it from a different perspective. So I think I could totally agree with that, but I probably wouldn't have been able to articulate it as well as you just have, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I think it can feel quite uncomfortable, right? To sort of challenge yourself to always be learning, especially when you get to the big wide world where you're in a job and you're supposed to know what you're doing. Um, and
Nobody does.
yeah, exactly. And for me, that was sort of I guess the light bulb moment. And I always credit the sales coach that I was fortunate enough to work with for sort of opening me up to that. And I think if I look back, maybe I was sort of always open to that, but maybe not as confident, or I didn't know how to do it. And he sort of really unlocked that. But we're seeing candidates now that are straight out of uni that they just want to learn, and it's really sincere. They're not just saying that so that they can get through an interview. Their actions define it, because they take on the feedback. And if you have a good interview process, they might not get a role, but you talk to them later and how they've answered the same question is completely different. They're the people that are going to get on a cold call, mess it up 10 times, nail it the next 100 times, and then they'll be away. And they're the ones that we see as top performers. So, yeah, sometimes you have to go through a little bit of that adversity, and it links back to the resilience to understand that. So, yeah, it's all interesting, and that's sales and trying to understand people, I guess.
Yeah. And do you think that businesses, so aside to those that use your recruitment services, or other recruiters, obviously these businesses, a lot of businesses that don't, and they go to market and they do their own interview process. Do you think that that's what they're looking for? Or do you think that there's this misconception around what a good salesperson actually looks like on paper or face to face?
Um, I think businesses are often trying to do that. I think our experience of some of the larger organisations that have got really defined talent teams in place, they've probably got really thorough processes set up, and so they're in a really good position. I think there's a real difference between, for instance, looking for, I know this is sort of extremes, but an engineer versus a salesperson. So if you're doing across all of that, it's going to be a challenge. So yeah, I guess there's probably a little drop off there. But there's, just as going back to what we were saying at the beginning, there's no sort of perfect salesperson that can answer these 10 questions and get 10 out of 10, and they're going to hit the ground running and nail it. it's different for everybody and it's different for every prospect. So you have to work within that to understand and who could fit with that company and what they're looking for and the market that they're working to, and that's going to change as well, right? I know, Harriet, you've had a great experience in your career of scaling businesses. The skills you need at the beginning of a sort of a startup are really different in that sales process to when you're 100, 500,000 person business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's looking at, there's a lot of emphasis on the success element of those early stages. And, we talked before offline, and I joked just earlier about, it's the cheapest element is that first, those first few months. And although you might think it's expensive, if they work out, then they will make you a lot of money. And I think a real bugbear of mine is around that, work for free or work on 100% commission. And I don't know how you feel about this, but I get asked this a lot more than I thought I ever would. And I think I remember when I first got asked it, and I was like, oh, like do people do that? Like, is that part of it? Do people do that in the industry? Because I've never done it personally. And I've never even thought that would be a thing. However, when I've been asked about it, I remember when I first got asked a few times, and I gave the answer, which was like, oh yeah, like, go and, if you can find somebody that will do that, then go for it. And I remember very early on in my business, I had a girl who I actually trained previously, and she's like, I want to come and work with you. And I was like, I can't pay you. Like, I haven't got, we weren't there yet. And it was just me in the business. And I was like, look, if you want to come on board and work with me, I'm happy. I'll pay you commission on anything, that you sell. And a week into the role, I called her and I said, you cannot do this. I have to pay you. And in the end, we did. And I worked out how much I could pay, and I paid her an hourly rate. And we got into that mix, because as soon as I could see, although, I've been in sales for a long time, as soon as I could see what she was doing, I was getting all these contacts in my CRM. I was getting all these notes and all this information and these meetings and inquiries. And I was like, you're doing all of this work. And yes, if it pays off, you get a sale, but I'm getting exposure from your phone calls and from your posting on LinkedIn. And so from there, I didn't do it. And I had two only in the last 3 or 4 weeks that have asked me, oh, can you speak to this person, that they're looking for somebody on 100% commission. I was like, well, you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. That's my, kind of first response. But think about what else they're doing for you in the organization. And, if you put the emphasis in them now, then the scalability is going to be more consistent, but also more achievable. And I always come back to the view of, I think it was Richard Branson, I think, that said this, that, when they say, but what if they fail? And they say, but what if they fly? And, or what if they leave? What if they stay? And I've seen, different quotes of that. And I think there's an argument for everything. But if you don't give it a go, and if you don't put the belief in somebody, they're never going to get to where you want them to be. And we want to breed and nurture these top performers. And you can't expect somebody to come in and have no development and expect to hit the ground running, and it's all on you, because actually they're selling your product, they're selling your brand and your service. And so I guess really like that success element. Do you agree with that piece, or do you have a different view on the commission, 100% commission, idea?
No, I definitely agree with it, particularly for funded startups in the tech space, because that just ethically that doesn't sit right with that, and we very rarely see it. In fact, I can't remember ever seeing that on the commission only side. There are other industries where that commission only element exists. It's not something that we get involved with. I can see sort of the case for that, and there are some people that can go into that role and actually learn some really transferable skills that will set them up to make the next step. And definitely that resilience, which we spoke about before. If you're in one of those commission only roles, then massive kudos to you, because that's tough. And they have that in abundance. But yeah, it's a tough one. It's not something that I feel exactly the same as you, Harriet, on that. If you're having somebody that's prospecting for you and bringing in all of that information and doing all of that, then you're getting a lot more than just the deal at the end.
Mm.
Particularly when you're in sales and you understand all of the work and the strife to get there. So
Absolutely.
yeah, it's
Strife is a great word to get there. It's definitely worth it. It's definitely worth it. So a question I would love to ask you and your thoughts on, or your experience on, is around that success element. So we've found the candidate, we've tracked them against what we know makes a top performer, and they're in those early stages, they come into the business. What should we be looking for in terms of success? Because we're breeding this top performer. And what would success look like? What should it look like? What should we set our expectations at? Some insights on there.
okay. So I think like for where we are, um, so I'll talk specifically around sort of SDR and BDR positions. I'd break that down into the first 3 months or however long that needs to be the ramp up period. You want to get the quantity of their output out. And then over the next 3 months, focus on the quality. And then the final 6 months of their first year, focus on the consistency. So the metrics to use at each stage will be different and dependent on your business and who you're prospecting into. So if you're going after an enterprise level deal, it's going to be very different to somebody who's closing 14 deals in a day. But yeah, so that top performer will have that consistency, and so they're not just saying, oh well, I've done 180% in this month, but then I was 30% of my quota for the next 3 months. They're at 100% every month,
Yeah.
and they know how to get there. They know how to manage their load to do that. That's the sort of person that you can then begin to work with to upskill and move further in the sales cycle.
Yeah, interesting. And I love because I very much align with that quantity quality. And then I like then that consistency piece, because I think that often I will often see that quality and the consistency being brought in together. And then that then build out beyond. But I like the fact that, it's that 3 month, 3 months, 6 months. And I think as well for me, I was advised this from a leadership perspective, is ensure that you're very clear on what success looks like, and then that will then ensure then that the expectations are set with the salesperson, as well as what you're prepared to deal with at the lowest level, but what good and great would also look like. And a lot of the sales audits and sales reviews that we do, we get to see that, that okay, good and great, or average, good and great. And I think it's then looking at beyond that, because everybody wants this top performer, but it's about managing those expectations, taking them on that journey, and then being able to support that. And I think the high point for me there is then that having that uncapped, lack of ceiling, maybe for a better word, is that so that they can keep going. Because there's one surefire way, in my opinion, to demotivate a top salesperson, and that is to give them a target and a ceiling. And as soon as you get to that point, you've now created a lazy salesperson that will very rarely come back from that.
Yeah, so true. Yeah, and then I guess just on that consistency is so important, because there was so many times in the teams that we managed where you could get somebody to be top performer for a month, and then they want to go faster and faster, and then they forget some of the things that got them to be or not forget, they just rush through them, because to them they're doing it every day. That same call is happening, and so you have to work with them to slow that down. Remember the really key bits of their call, or the process that get them to moving the deal to the next stage. And so building that consistency is, again, it's a different thing to learn rather than learning how to do everything and getting success initially.
Yeah, and it's going back to those basics that you've just highlighted there, and so often that's what we're pulling salespeople back to do, because I liken it to the fact that you've got to this next level and you're doing these great things and seeing these great results. That often as salespeople, they either stop to celebrate. That's often what we see, and then we see these dips, these peaks and troughs, and or they're doing something different. And then they're like, but this isn't working. And it's like, well, what, like, go back to your best month ever. What was working? What helped you get there? And, for me, I see a lot of these top performers, they go back, they're always reviewing. And I think taking the moment to review and reflect and plan is where I know it's certainly where I built my cadence of real drive within that sales arena to say I'm going to keep going to the next level. I never want to go backwards. And so I think that consistency level for me was always in reflection and then planning of reflection and planning. And if I ever had a week or two that just didn't quite get there, I'd be like, what did I used to do? Like, what am I missing? Because even if it's down to, the what time I get up in the morning versus what I ate for breakfast versus, what I said at the beginning of that call, I was looking for everything to try and refine that again. And so really interesting for what the thanks for agreeing with me on the going back to basics, because no salesperson wants to go back to basics. They're like, I used to do that 10 years ago. But it is what creates the success, and go back to what does work for you rather than trying to find this sparkly new way of doing things that might not work for you.
Yeah, but like Harriet, that story you told there is just a great example of that. I think you said like thirst for knowledge, or that reflecting, or that coachability, and being able to look at yourself. Because that knowledge, it might be something that you knew last week and weren't thinking about. It's not always something new, and it's not always going to be hidden in a book. So yeah, no, I love that.
Yeah, interesting. Well, it's been great to get your insights on this recruitment journey and obviously, finding candidates. And it's great because everybody else we've got in this series are in tech sales, and they're either the top performer in their field, or they are nurturing them within their teams. And so I'm really glad we were able to have this conversation and record it, because I think you and I talk about some gold, Jake. So I'm glad we've got it there, even if I do say so myself. And so I'm going to pop your details in the show notes as well, so that people can come and find you, learn a bit more about you and the services that you offer, and maybe just share some insights of their own journey as well. So thank you so much for sharing and being here. And happy selling, Jake.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you for having me on, Harriet. Great chat as always.